Um, good evening. These are definitely different from them actually coming to a club. You get a whole different
Yeah, you
conversation and a whole different thing. Anyway, right. So, good evening, everyone. Yes, my name's Daniel Bridge. I'm a professional photography tutor. So, I do private tuition and group workshops and talks and various different things. So tomorrow night I'm going up to London to do a workshop up there, but it's all outdoors. We'll be fine, and it's before we go up to tier 2, so we're perfectly safe. Yeah, I do different workshops going from the basics through composition ones and close-up and macro ones, bird of prey ones with a falconry company normally, but this year's been a little bit strange, as it has for everyone. So. Yeah, some of those workshops have gone ahead in different forms and some of them haven't, but I am doing private tuition, one-to-ones and small groups and so on. So there's still that option. And if you enjoy this talk, you never know, you might be desperate to have me back again or not, who knows. Anyway, so I've been self-employed since 2002, and I've been running workshops since 2003. So I've had some thousands, I can't remember how many it is now, 2,500 or so people through on workshops, and another 1,000 or so on private tuition. And so, you get asked all sorts of different questions, and I've heard, I was going to say probably heard most of the questions, but I don't know. I always certainly, you get questions that you haven't necessarily expected or had before every now and again. Or probably the biggest challenge, I think, for a tutor of anything really, but certainly for a photography tutor, is trying to figure out what the question actually is when someone asks you, because if they don't know what the thing is they're trying to learn about and they're asking you a question, then it often isn't actually kind of worded in a way that really makes sense, if you see what I mean. Probably like that explanation. But yeah, so it's a very enjoyable job, and it's been full-time for the last 5 years, and still managing to put food on the table, and hopefully going to the Isle of Wight in a week or so. Fingers crossed, all being well.
Unless they allowed? That's abroad, isn't it?
Yeah. Got to isolate for 2 weeks on the way back, but we'll be fine. Yeah. So one of the things that I am asked about regularly is flash guns, use of flash. So early summer, I did a talk for a purely online camera club from Surrey, and then talking to the guy afterwards, he said, did I do anything on flash? Did I do a talk on flash? And up to that point, no, I hadn't. So I said, well, I can certainly put something together. So I've done this one once before, and it'll be fine. It'll be fine. All my talks and things, I like to be interactive. It's a lot more interesting for me. If you have questions, feel free to ask. Don't sit there thinking I don't want to interrupt him. Especially, second time of doing this talk, it's going to be slightly less structured than it might be otherwise, but that's fine. So yeah, I've got a slideshow that will show you some example pictures, and I've got different sections on there. So we'll go through essentially the workings of a flash gun like this, and the different features that it has, and what we can do with it, and what some of the terms mean. So for some of you, you might be sitting there thinking, well, I know all this, and I'm not going to tell you anything particularly new. You never know, I might do though. Some of you, this might be kind of a bit of a mystery, really. So it's probably a reasonably kind of wide range of benefits for various people, or a narrow range of benefits, a varying range of benefits. There you go. So yeah, so I've got this slideshow. I should actually show. I just checked for a start, make sure I can actually share that. It looks like I can. There you go. I nearly said that's me. That's not me. So yes, the talk tonight is an introduction to Flash with me, Daniel Bridge. So we'll start off with the basic features of a flash gun. And the nature of this talk really is that I keep jumping backwards and forwards between me and the slideshow. How big am I? Just little on the screen at the moment, or am I full screen for you?
Full screen.
Full screen. Excellent. Good. So you can, when I hold things up and do things like that, you'll get to see what's going on. How many of you have got flash guns for a start? Just wave if you've got a flash gun. Okay, so a fair number of you. And excellent. So how many of you are confident in using your flash gun? Less weighing. Okay, fine. That's fine.
I'm not.
Okay, if you'd all waved, then I'd have probably gone, oh, that's not much point me doing this. But there you go. So, yeah, what we'll do is we'll go through all the different features, say what some of the different terms mean, such as slow speed synchronization and zooming on a flash gun and things like that. And hopefully, as I say, we'll cover things that even if you've got a flash gun and you're confident using it, there might still be things that I'll show you that you perhaps weren't aware of, or just using it in a slightly different way than you had done. So, flash gun like this really, it fits on the top of the camera, it goes on the hot shoe there on the top of the camera, and it's a lot more powerful than we have the flash that we probably have in the camera. We've got pop-up flash on the camera, on most cameras, not all cameras, but pop-up flash on there. But that's ideally kind of just a last resort kind of thing. It's very low powered, and there's not an awful lot we can do with that flash. So having a flash gun like this opens up all sorts of possibilities. It's a lot bigger than the flash on the camera. Physically across here it's a lot bigger, but we've got to fit a whole load of batteries in there. So I shouldn't really tip those out. I've got to put all those back in again. But that's there because it's a lot more powerful than the flash gun that we have in the camera. So it draws a lot more power in the first place. So we have to have batteries in there. So generally, the physical size of the flash gun is a lot bigger than we would have with just a pop-up. It allows us to do various different things. So most flash guns of this sort will at least have what's called a bounce head, and that allows us to tip that flash gun up, so it's going to point up at the ceiling. And that means that we can take a shot where, rather than having that flash firing straight at our subject and giving us very harsh light, we can point it up at the ceiling, and it will that light will go up to the ceiling and come back down again. There's a lot more distance for it to travel, but that means that the light that goes up onto the ceiling and spreads out a bit up there, then spreads out even further across the whole of the scene that we're shooting. And the distance that light travels from the flash gun to the ceiling and then back down to your subject isn't that much different from the distance from the flash gun to the ceiling to the background, unless you're in a massive great room. So the lighting is much more even. You get much less of the kind of rabbit in the headlights kind of look to a subject in a really dark background. So it spreads that light out and softens it a lot more. So that's, bounce. Most flash guns of this sort will do bounce flash. A lot of them also will do swivel. So not only does it bounce, but it will allow that flash to turn from side to side. And that means if you're doing a portrait format shot, you can still have that flash bouncing off the ceiling, same as you would have done if you're doing a landscape format shot. So it makes it more flexible with where we're pointing that flash gun. So, and they'll generally even point backwards as well. Don't do that if you're using live view and holding the camera up in front of your face, because you would oblige yourself. But if you also have that kind of pointing up about 45 degrees and you're in maybe against a wall or in the corner of a room, that flash could fire back over your head into that corner, and then you've got this kind of massive softbox. We'll talk about light modifiers and what we can use to soften light and change how that light works. But effectively, when you're bouncing the light off of the surface, it's acting like a massive light source rather than this relatively small area like that. So being able to bounce and swivel your head around is really quite useful. Most flash guns are going to have, let's get that focused on there, hopefully. So, oh, no, come back. Most flash guns are going to have some sort of screen on there, which can then tell you various bits of information. So, for instance, up here, it's saying PTTL. We'll come on to what that means in a little bit. We've got a focal length, 16 millimeters. We've got this value here, which is essentially exposure compensation. This is flash exposure compensation. We can turn the flash up or down. So yeah, all sorts of information that we can get on that on screen on there, but there's all sorts of different things on there as well. So we'll go through again, say what some of those things mean too. So that's one sort of flash gun. If I just share my screen again, I'll be back over here. We can, this is the result of bouncing flash. So this was in a marquee, so it's actually a fairly large area, and I've bounced that flash off the ceiling. So we can see that the background's reasonably well lit. Foreground subjects are as well. Got light shining a little bit on their heads, and there are still shadows under chins and things, but it's, as I say, much softer lighting than it would have been if we'd fired the flash directly at the subject. This was in a bar up in London, and I'm on a mezzanine floor, so the ceiling was probably about 8 or so feet above me. But again, to soften that light, rather than firing the flash straight down on top of them, I had that flash head essentially pointing backwards. I'm looking down on them, pointing backwards, but raised a little bit. And it's bouncing off the ceiling that was above me and coming back down onto them. So it's softened that light again from there. And again, there are shadows, but there's no real harsh shadows like we'd have had if I'd shot the flash straight at them. So bouncing the flash off of the surface, using that bounce and swivel head can give us these softer looks than we would get otherwise. Another type of flash gun, which I've got some knocking around somewhere, but I don't actually use it, is a ring flash. So rather than going, part of it would be mounted on the hot shoe of the camera, but rather than having this flash head that's kind of looking a head like this, a ring flash goes on the front of the lens and is generally either used for macro photography or portrait type of things, fashion and stuff like that. So ring flashing surrounding the front of the lens means that light is coming from all directions if we were to use the whole of that ring. So we get light from underneath and from the top and from the sides. And if we're lighting a subject right up closely, if we're doing a macro shot, it just means that we've got light from all directions and we'll light that thing pretty well. For portraits and so on, it's a bigger ring flash. But again, it just means that you can get quite soft lighting, really, but it's literally in your face, really. But I do occasionally use ring flash for macro photography, but not terribly often, I suppose. Well, certainly not at the moment because my one kind of died. But when I did use it, it was for doing things like this, where I'm balancing that flash with the ambient light. So I'm using the ring flash as a fill flash, really. So it's adding in light to the foreground, lighting areas that would have been in shadow otherwise, so the underside of the butterfly, underside of the flower, and so on. But I'm using the ambient light to record the detail in the background and so on. There's a certain kind of effect that you get with ring flash that is kind of a shadow that's almost like a halo around the subject. So this was my cat's paws on top of the clothes area, and we had a sheet or a dust sheet actually on there. So he used to climb about on top of that. So I've taken a picture of this with a ring flash, and you can see sort of around the pores is this shadow in the background. And if we had a subject that, if we could see the bottom side of this subject as well, because of the bit that's in the foreground there, we can't see the underside, but that halo would go all around it with a ring flash. So it's a certain look. You see it certainly in kind of fashion photography, as there's someone stood in front of a wall and you see this kind of dark shadow, or darker, it's not really dark, but it's this darker shadow that kind of surrounds them. It's because the photographers used a ring flash. So there's a certain look, and if you look right in their eyes, you'd see a donut-shaped highlight rather than a point source. Ring flashes are certainly good for certain things, but the macro setup that I use is using my hot shoe mounted flash gun, and I'll show you that very shortly. But yeah, with the ring flash as a fill light, I think it works really well. So again, this was using a ring flash. So the natural light's coming from behind, got sunshine shining on the back end of the fly, and the ring flash is putting that light back into the face of the fly to lift those shadows. So it does that sort of thing really well. Just trying to think if I've forgotten anything. Oh yes, actually I have. So as far as the structure of the flash is concerned, we have this main flash on here, but you may well find that you've got another little flash, or a light. This has got an LED on it. So if I put that on and turn the LED on, you see this bright light on there. So if I was to shine that in my face, I'll be blinking all night, but by shining out in my face, I'm adding light in. It's essentially acting like a fill flash. So if I was bouncing a light off a ceiling, I could still put a catch light in the eye by using that. I'll just turn that off so I don't keep squinting at that. Other ways of doing a similar thing would be for, some flashes have a little, have I still got that around to hand? I don't think I have. Would have a little pull out sort of white bit of card almost that comes out like the top there. So when you're bouncing the flash, that bounces a light in. Because of this, it's got the LED, it hasn't got one, but it has got this little thing, which I'll explain in a moment. Sometimes you have a little pull out white card, and that's if you're bouncing the light off the ceiling, you can bounce a little bit back into your subject to again get the catch lights in the eyes, rather than if you haven't got that light shining straight at them, sometimes the eyes can look a little bit flat. So it's just putting that little bit of a sparkle in the eye. And the other bit when we do zoom in. Anything else on there? I don't think so, not that I can think of. So we shall move on, and if anything else pops into my head, I shall come back to that. Okay, so light modifiers. So we can change how this flash gun works by using different types of modifier, and probably the simplest one is a softbox of some design. So this is quite a small one here. It's just one that just kind of velcros, or kind of probably not even velcros, probably just got a little elastic edge to that, which slips over the top of the flash gun. And what a softbox like that is doing is spreading the light out further. It's widening the area that the flash originates from, and that allows us to get softer light. If we're thinking of a flash gun like this, and it's a relatively small area, we're going to end up with reasonably defined shadows. Whereas if we use something like this, which is a softbox, which will go on the top of this, which I'll just put this on, out of shot because I've got room to do it in shot. Right, there. I would say talk amongst yourselves, but you might find it more interesting, so I won't say that. So that softbox then means that that flash gun is now, that flashlight is emanating from this much bigger area, and that means that light's coming from the side more. If that was shining straight at me, rather than being a small area, reasonably big on a flash gun, but it's still relatively a small area, and coming straight at my face, there would be still quite defined shadows. But if this flash gun is, that light is spread out more at the origin, then the light comes more from the sides, top and bottom, and it just means it will soften the shadows that we've got. And the bigger and bigger that softbox gets, the softer and softer that light is going to become. Simply because rather than coming straight on at me, for instance, the light's then coming in at the sides, as well as straight on and from above and below. We get that nice softer light because of it.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Of course you can.
Yeah. That softbox, which way did you have the flash gun? Was it pointing upwards, or was it pointing at the subject matter?
So the one that I've got is the flash is pointing upwards for this one. So the the flash is in there, and that
right
in there.
Okay.
So the flash fires up into this box. It's got a reflective back on it, so the whole of this thing lights up when it's used. But that's this particular design of softbox. Ones I've used previously, and I'll show you a picture in a moment. Let's just share that.
That one that you showed, that's it. That one, all those, yeah.
Yeah. So that one is firing. The flash is firing forward onto this diffuser panel, and that's a relatively small one. I've got a bigger one. That's the one that I've just shown you. So that's a bigger area.
Right.
It doesn't actually matter that the flash isn't firing straight at your subject, because it's illuminating the whole panel, which then projects forward because it'll go out sideways as well, like any softbox will do. So any diffuser like this is going to reduce the power of your flash, because some of that light isn't going straight at your subject. Some of it will be going out to the side and up and down, beyond where your subject is. It's less directional light, but because of that, it is softer. So as I say, the bigger the softbox gets, the softer that light becomes. So you could get a softbox something like 1 meter across, and that will give you potential for much softer lighting. It depends really how close or far away your subject is. If my subject with this sort of softbox was 2 feet away, let's say it's a macro subject and it's not even 2 feet away, then that's going to be really quite soft lighting already, and having that bigger than that, having the softbox bigger than that, isn't going to make a huge amount of difference to the softness of that light. But if I'm doing a portrait of someone and they're 5 feet away, then this is still kind of relatively a small area. So enlarging the softbox is going to give us a softer light. So it depends how far away your subject is. A rule of thumb that tends to crop up is that the distance from your subject to the softbox should ideally be the same as the diameter of the softbox. But that's for kind of really soft light, and it's probably the point where it's not going to get any softer if you've got a bigger and bigger softbox.
Right.
If you have that meter softbox but add it 10 meters away, then it's again becoming quite a directional light source. So it depends how close that is to your subject as to how effective it's going to be as a softbox.
Lovely. Thanks very much.
That's all right. There's no problem. So softboxes like that will give us this more spread out sort of lighting, and a softbox is certainly what I've used the majority of the time that I've been shooting macro photography. So rather than using a ring flash, I've been using a softbox on just a standard flash gun. So recently, I say recently, probably about 2.5 years ago, I suppose now, changed to this Flash Bender, the Rode Flash product, Flash Bender 2 thing. So this is actually a large reflector. So rather than a softbox, this is a reflector. But what it means is some of the light from that flash gun comes straight down onto my subject, which is a bit of moss just down on the rocks in the foreground or in front of the lens. Some of that light from the flash gun is going to come on to, say, halfway along the reflector and then get bounced down. Some of it's going to go pretty much to the end of the reflector and get bounced down. So again, it's just expanding the area that light is kind of emanating from, and it gives us a softer look to it than we would have got otherwise. So yeah, and you can start sort of bending that light around, which is why it's called off. You're bending the reflector around. It's got wires in it, but it gives a very similar look to the softbox that I used to use. It's just a little bit more adaptable, rather than having a relatively small softbox that's just really only useful for small subjects. Something like this you can use as a way of bouncing extra light in if you're bouncing light off of the ceiling. So you could use it for portraits and things. You could use it in event situations and so on. So it's a little bit more wide-ranging than what you can actually do with this sort of thing. But the sort of lighting that you get from something like that is this sort of thing. So we still get the light coming down from above the subject. We still get a shadow underneath it, but it's pretty soft lighting. It's not so harsh that you get really, really bright highlights. I mean, this is the problem with insects and things, is they tend to have reasonably reflective bits on them. The wings can be reflective, their bodies can be quite reflective, but having that light spread out over a larger area does soften how harsh those highlights are. So yeah, something like a softbox on a flash gun or the reflectors I'm using these days can give you this sort of lighting. So if you've got a flash gun already and you're perhaps getting into macro stuff, or you just want a macro lighting setup, I don't think you can really go wrong with getting some sort of softbox.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah, cool, Ken. Yeah.
Most DSLRs compensate, so whatever type of reflector you use, whether it's a small softbox or that one you just showed us,
yeah,
most cameras just automatically compensate for whatever you're putting on them.
In general, yes, depending how you're using it. If you're using auto exposure and you're relying on the camera and the flash gun to sort that exposure out for you, then in general, yes, because it's measuring the light that's coming back off the subject,
yes,
and that shouldn't change. The amount of light that you're getting back, the amount of light that you need. Where you could run into potential issues, I suppose, would be if your subject was a little way away and you were using a softbox that was spreading that light around a little bit more and inevitably absorbing a bit of that light as well. You might find that your flash gun isn't perhaps powerful enough to get enough light into your subject, in which case the camera, again, you could put the ISO up so that so it doesn't need as much light, but it really depends how you're using the camera as to whether it would be able to compensate for that that was going on there. But in general, yes, using auto exposure, the camera's going to be adjusting the exposure to take into account the fact that it doesn't actually really know it doesn't know there's a reflector on there or anything.
No, of course not.
So it just adjusts things to give you the same exposure.
Okay, so you use auto exposure, not TTL.
Ultimately, that's the same thing. We'll get on to exposure mode.
Yes. Yeah, but you put TTL on the flash gun, don't you?
Yes. So there's different. Yeah, we'll get on to exposure modes and what I'm using. In different situations, what I might use, and so on.
Thank you very much.
That's all right. What's coming up next? Okay, so other sort of modifiers. Actually, we'll come before we disappear off this completely. Other sort of modifiers. I will show you some when I'm talking about using the flash off camera But you can get gridded attachments, which mean that you get very directional light, so it stops the light spreading out to the sides and gives you very like a concentrated beam. You know, I've got one of those that came with the kit with these Rogue flash things, and you can adjust how wide or otherwise that beam is. You can get coloured gels, so you can change the colour of the lighting that the flash is producing, either to match it into other lighting that you've got. So, for instance, if you're shooting in tungsten lighting, the colour of the light from the flash should be more like daylight, so it'd be much bluer, or the tungsten lighting is going to be much more orangey. You know, if we look at Dave Arnold's camera, he's looking really quite orange, and that's because he's got well, maybe he loves a tanning booth, I don't know, but it's but it's because he's got tungsten lighting, and the camera that he's using hasn't adjusted for that, or he's set the white balance on it and it's on daylight or something like that. But we've got the that warmth to it, whereas we look at Jeff Sinclair and he's looking much cooler. Very cool he's looking. So
That's 'cause you've got a daylight bulb.
What's that, sorry?
I've got a daylight bulb.
There you go. So he's got a daylight balance bulb. So if we're using a flash gun, which is much more balanced to daylight conditions, and you're using that in an area you've got tungsten or compact fluorescent bulbs or LEDs with a warm tone to it, then you would find that what was lit with flash would look a lot cooler in colour than the stuff that was lit with the other sort of lighting. So you could use colour gels to make that light from the flash much warmer in tone and match in with the artificial light much better. And then whatever you did with your white balance to change how those colours actually look for the overall picture, because the two different light sources are the same sort of colour, we can make those adjustments rather than having two different colours of light source. What else might we use as adjustment? I mean, you know, going back to the softboxes and macro stuff, if you've got a flash gun and you want a simple softbox, something like a 4-pint milk carton, you know, cut a little hole in the back of it and just gaffer tape it to your flash gun, and that'll make a really good softbox. The first softbox I had was made out of a pedal bin liner, just a white pedal bin liner that I cut a rectangle about 6 by 5 inches, something like that, and 4 triangular bits that I kind of welded to all together into a softbox shape using a soldering iron and a steel rule as a nice straight edge. And that worked just as well, to be honest, as anything that I've used since. But I had to attach it to the flash gun with a rubber band around sort of this bit, and I had to lift the rubber band up and just blow in it to inflate the softbox. But it softened that light really well. So just anything that softens light will work really well. And as I say, it doesn't have to be that big to get a really nice soft lighting for macro stuff. Don't rush out and buy a ring flash or something that's going to potentially cost you a good few £100 specifically to do macro, when you might already have a flash gun that does what you need it to do, really.
Can I just say something? Okay. Daniel?
Yeah,
I've used a couple of sheets of greaseproof paper.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Tissue can work, you know, even on a pop-up flash, you know, you can hold something in front of it just to soften that light and spread it out a bit. And that's there's all sorts of things that you can use, just ways of spreading that light out. The only thing I'd say with the greaseproof paper is get one that's fairly, some of them are quite a warm sort of tone of paper, others are kind of be a bit more neutral. So I go for the more neutral one, otherwise you'll all look like Dave. So we come on to that thing there with, well, I won't bother going back to the slideshow at the moment because it just said zooming. So zooming, we can zoom in and out with a flash gun, which might seem a little bit weird, but we're potentially zooming in and out with the lens that we're using. We could go for that wide field of view. We could zoom in and have a narrower field of view. And what we can do with zooming on a flash gun is match the angle of view that the flash fires over to suit the angle of view that our lens is giving us. So if I hold this up again and try and focus on this, okay. There we go. So yeah, on the flash gun, we've got this head here. We can see the actual flash area in there. And at the moment, that's right up close to the diffuser, or the bit on here that's spreading that light out. And that would mean when it fired, it would give us quite a wide field of view. Flash is kind of, think of a window type. Get that back on me again. We've got so you've got that light up against a window, and it flashed, it would be able to spread right wide out. You'd be able to. What's the best way of explaining it? Yeah, you get it anyway. So have the flash up close to the window. That flash would fire over a wide area. Whereas if you had the flash further back in the room and fire the flash out through the window, it would cover a smaller area. And that is what the zooming on a flash gun allows us to do. So rather than necessarily having it so that it's spreading right out and covering a large area, which you probably want if you're shooting with a wide angle lens, we can instead change where that flash head is. And this looks like it's getting bigger, but it's actually going back inside the flash head and forwarding it. So if I turn it to the side, let's turn it that way perhaps. Perhaps you have to see it better, that it's going backwards inside there. I'll go backwards, go back again, back. Right, so that's all the way back inside there. So the flash, the actual flash head is kind of drawn back inside it, and it just means that rather than being up close to the front and that light spreading right out, it's further back, and it gives us a more narrow beam that just covers the field of view that the lens is giving us. Now, chances are, as you zoom in and out with the lens, as long as your flash is dedicated to your camera and actually communicates with the camera, as you zoom in and out, that flash head is going to change as well. So if you go out for a wider angle, it will move it further forward and be able to spread that light out to cover that. And if you zoom in more with the lens, it will draw that flash head back, and it will give you that narrow field of view. So it suits the angle of view that you're getting. But I'm doing this with a little manual zoom on here, which a little zoom button on there, and we can see that as I'm doing that, we can see that focal length changing, going through there. So the focal length showing up here. So it could either be there where it's going to be automatically changing. So if I had this on a camera and I zoom the lens in and out, we'd see that value changing as I did it. Or we can actually set a value. So it might be that you're using a lens that isn't communicating with the camera. So the camera doesn't know what that focal length actually is, and therefore what it should be setting that to. Or we can actually use it to change the area that we're lighting in a shot, rather than actually lighting everything that's in front of us. Maybe we want to pick out a certain subject within a wider field of view. So you'd be using a wide angle lens, but zoom your flash head in so that it's in that narrowest angle of view, and you could pick a subject out.
Quick question, if I may.
Sorry?
A quick question, if I may.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, absolutely.
We're getting into some real detail here, and there's a thing which gets me confused with focal length is small sensors.
Okay.
So is this relating to the 35mm equivalent?
Yes, on
length,
this one,
or is it the actual lens photo length?
this is all about angles of view. So this is, I use a crop sensor camera. So I've got an APS size sensor in the camera. So
yeah, I've got an APS-C in mine. So 18mm on the lens is optically the equivalent with a standard full frame sensor of 25mm.
About 28 probably actually, but a little bit longer. But yeah, so so you've both got that same angle of view. So all this is really doing is changing the angle that the flash is firing over. But what it's telling us on the back there, that's saying 16 millimeters.
So that's not necessarily 60 millimeters on my lens, it's the equivalent length.
Well, what would almost certainly happen, as long as it's a...
I'm trying to get a specific answer.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely no. So when I put this on, I shoot on Pentax. How many other people here shoot Pentax?
Got an old Pentax film camera.
I don't know. Heathens, a lot of you. Right, so I shoot on Pentax, and I've got an APS-C size sensor in my Pentax. So when I put this on my Pentax with that APS-C size sensor, the flash and the camera communicate, and the flash says, you've got a small sensor in there. So what I'm going to show you on here, that focal length, is going to be the focal length of the lenses that you're using. So when I zoom out to 16 millimeters, which is equivalent of 24 millimeters on a full frame camera, this is going to say 16 millimeters. If I then put this on a Pentax full frame camera and used a 24 millimeter lens, which gave me exactly the same field of view, this would zoom to the same position as it did at 16 millimeters, but on the back here it would say 24 millimeters. So it would actually relate directly to the lens that's on the camera that you've got. But it will tell you a focal length that is actually the focal length of your lens. So if I was to put this on, what would that be? So if I put that on a full frame camera, it would go through a range that went from 24 millimeters to probably 85 or something like that, I think. In exactly the same positions, with the flash head moving backwards and forwards in there, exactly the same positions as when I'm doing it at the moment, and it's saying 16 millimeters through to 58 millimeters. And I don't know, you still look confused, so I don't know if that's answered your question at all. Has it done at all?
I'll have to try some experiments, I think.
So
nothing like doing experiments to finally figure it out. Because if the thing is, if you get it wrong, you're losing illumination.
Yeah. So with a flash gun, so what camera have you got?
I have a Canon EOS M50 mirrorless.
Okay. Yep. So
that's an APS-C sensor, so the focal length marked on the lens is always a little bit smaller than the equivalent optical focal length.
Well, absolutely, but I mean, I think that's probably where. How long have you been using crop sensor cameras? Have you recently?
Oh no, I started off with the Panasonic Lumix bridge camera. That's a heavily cropped sensor.
Yeah,
1/2 or something like that.
Yeah, tiny little things, aren't they? They're probably about 6 or 7 millimeters across.
So what it claims is 25 millimeters on the Panasonic is actually 1.6 millimeters.
Right. So I think with those, there is that kind of a need to have some sort of equivalent focal length. But I think, certainly with digital SLRs, when they first kind of came out, and there's a whole thing of, this isn't a proper 28 millimeter lens anymore. It's still a 28 millimeter lens, but it just gives you a different field of view with a crop sensor camera. And then you would, I think, again, back to the very start, when you then get lenses that are designed specifically for digital cameras rather than film lenses that were being used on digital cameras. And then people were getting confused because they were saying, well, this is a 24 millimeter lens that's designed for digital cameras, therefore it gives me that wide angle. No, it's exactly the same as a 24 millimeter lens for a film camera. It's that hasn't changed at all. It's just that the sensor is small and you get that wider field of view, or rather you get a narrow field of view with that longer, or with that particular focal length. Ultimately, what because it's all down to angles of view. So with 18 millimeters, you're going to be getting the same, equivalent field of view that you would get with, roughly 28 millimeters with a full frame camera or film. It's just an angle of view that you're changing. So the widest angle that this will give you will likely be about 18 millimeters, or this is 16 millimeters, but something like that. Or if you're using full frame camera, 28 millimeters. It's still just an angle of view. It's not. Nothing changes because the size of the sensor changes. Well, it does. It is very confusing, isn't it? That's the unfortunate thing, really. I wish I could think of a better way of explaining that, really. I might have to come back to it.
We need
I'll have a
diagrams.
chat during the break. Anyway, right. So, another.
So there, you've met the bastard audience member from hell.
That's the sort of thing that you kind of just have to chat through, and generally draw pictures as well. I normally, when I'm doing tuition, I'll have a book and I draw pictures in a book, because pictures generally help a lot more than just trying to explain things. And getting your head around exactly what it is that you're kind of unsure about. Anyway. Yes, so something that's going to throw another spanner in the works. So this goes out to 16 millimeters or 24 millimeters if I'm on a full frame camera. And that gives me a certain angle of view. But if I was using a wider angle of that, let's say I put a 14 millimeter lens on, or a 12 millimeter or something like that, and I needed the flash to spread out further than that, we have this little extra diffuser that goes on the front there. And that helps to spread the light out wider than it would do normally. So we have potentially two things that will slide out of the little cover on there. One is that little white card that you might have, which helps to, if you're bouncing light straight up, to bounce a little bit of light straight back into your subject. But we also have this other kind of little diffuser panel-y type thing that helps to spread the light out more. So potentially what it can do when we're zooming the flash is that we can direct it towards the subject. So rather than shot this with a wide angle, but I could direct that flash by zooming in and just have it lighting the lady in the foreground much more than anyone else. And that helps to kind of pick her out as a subject rather than getting everyone in the shot lit kind of equally. So it could be that you're taking a portrait of someone in the woods or something like that, and you don't necessarily want all the trees around to be lit. You only want that subject to be lit. So you could, if it was dusk or something like that, you could zoom that flash in and get that narrower field of view. Any questions on zooming?
Hey, Fogel, then.
Okay, so exposure modes. So we have different exposure modes that we can use with a flash gun like this. So if I pop that back up on there, hopefully we get that on there. So up here in the corner we can see that it says PTTL. TTL part of it means through the lens, and what that actually refers to is the way that it's measuring the light that's coming into the camera through the lens. What actually happens when we're doing a shot, when it's doing using TTL, you might find ITTL or ETTL or various other something TTL options on there on a flash gun, depending on the brand of camera that you're using. But the TTL means through the lens. And what that means is that we're, when we take a photo, the flash actually fires twice. It's normally so close together, though, those flashes, that we don't notice it. So the reason it's firing twice is it does one burst of flash before the exposure actually happens. It measures the light that comes back off your subject, and it decides how much light it needs to actually put out for the actual exposure in that very, very short period of time. So it does this little burst of flash, that bounces back. It says, I've got, that subject might be quite close. There's lots of light coming back, so I don't actually need to put much light out to get a correct exposure. So it adjusts the amount of light that it needs, and when the second flash fires, that's when the shutters actually open and we make our exposure, and we get hopefully a correct exposure. So the TTL option is an auto exposure mode. We can generally we would use that with an auto exposure on the camera as well, so something like aperture priority or shutter priority or P mode or something like that, where we might be taking control of, say, the aperture value and setting that depth of field and getting the subject sharp, blurring the backgrounds on, and we're using this to set the exposure. So the flash gun is going to be helping to actually get the right amount of light through that lens. But potentially we might actually want a particular aperture and shutter speed and potentially ISO, and we might set that manually, but we could still use this on TTL. We could still use the flash gun to actually control the exposure that this is giving us, but use manual exposure for the ambient light, for instance. So we don't need to be using necessarily auto exposure TTL on this and auto exposure on the camera. It could be manual exposure on the camera and auto exposure with the flash gun, if that works for the particular thing that you're shooting. But we also have the option of that hasn't fired. Come on, focus. There we go. But we also have, so I've got a mode button around here somewhere. It's that one there, isn't it? We also have the option of manual exposure, where we tell the flash exactly how much power to use. We can do that over here. It says 1/1. It is a ratio. The first one is the maximum amount of flash that it could put out, and the second figure is the kind of the proportion of that it's actually using, if you like. Well, it's a fraction that's showing you how much it's actually putting out. So at the moment, that's doing full power. It's doing the maximum amount of light that it could do. If I adjust that, which way is that going to go? There we go. So that's now gone to half power. That's quarter power, 8th, 16th, 32nd, 64th, 128th, and 256th. So now it'd be putting out 265th of the original amount of light, or the overall amount of light that it could put out. So it might be that you've got a situation where you've got absolute control over the lighting, and perhaps the flash gun is the sole light source, or maybe you've got a couple of different flash guns or so on, or the ambient light is just very even, and it's not varying. The sun's not coming out and going back in. So you could be using manual exposure on the camera. You could be using manual exposure on the flash gun as well. And once you've got that exposure right, you could then know that you've got consistent results all the time because the light's the same every time. And depending on what aperture you're using, or what ISO you're using, and how far away your subject is, you could find that you need a very small amount of flash light that's coming out of that, or you might need the full power. But just a little bit of trial and error would get you to the point where you could get the correct exposure, hopefully. So so the manual flash allows us to set a particular amount of light that's coming out of there. My very first flash gun was purely manual, well, to the point where I didn't even have any control over the amount of flash that it was putting out. It was just, there you go, there's a whole lot of flash that you can have. And so that was limiting as to what I could actually do with it, but it actually worked pretty well for for macro stuff. And I found with a little bit of trial and error that ISO 200 and f9.5, when I had the softbox on the front, gave me the correct exposure vast majority of the time for something that was quite close. So the nice thing about digital photography is that we can experiment, we can do tests to find out things, and as long as we pay attention to what we're doing.
Daniel, you don't meter.
Pardon?
I'll take it you don't meter then.
Well, the what with a handheld light meter? No, I have done in the past, but the amount of times that I'm actually doing that is not really worth carrying a light meter around for it, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, you could have a flash light meter which you'd hold in front of your, if you're doing a portrait or something, you hold in front of your subject's face, and actually take a meter reading when the flash is firing and set your exposure from that. But because we have immediate feedback from the camera as to what that exposure is like, I would just do a test exposure and see what it looked like. And if it was too bright, I'd turn the power down. And if it was too dark and I was at full power, I'd put the ISO up or open the aperture up, whatever it was that was needed. And it probably wouldn't take an awful lot longer, if at all, than getting out a separate exposure meter and doing all that sort of thing. But it just looks a little less professional. If you're not waving an exposure meter in front of someone's face, then they know you know what you're doing. But if you start firing off a few different test exposures, then you'd get to the same result in the end, but potentially not as quickly, or you might get there in the same sort of time. And for most people, I don't think there's necessarily the need to start going and buying flash exposure meters and things, unless they're heavily into flash, and using studio flashes and things like that as well. We can control the output of the flash with when we're in. Let me get back to that one, in the TTL mode as well, though. So there's two ways of doing that. We can either do it on the flash gun, or we can do it via the camera. So that's using flash exposure compensation. So we've got this bit up here. It says we're in TTL mode, so this is auto exposure mode. This bit in the middle here, which is on 0 EV at the moment. So EV? Yes, it does. Thought it would do, but 0 EV means that the flash is going to give us what it thinks is the correct exposure. But we can adjust that. So we can turn that up. So I'm going to positive values, and I can go up to +2, and that's going to mean that that flash puts out more light than it thinks it should. So it could be that you've got a particularly light tone subject, and when the flash fires in the TTL mode, it gets this large amount of light reflected back off that light tone subject, and it says, okay, this is presumably an average tone subject that's just either really close or for some reason really reflective. So I'm going to turn that power down to make it an average toned result, and you'd end up with that light tone subject, whatever it might be, actually looking a bit drab and underexposed. So we could use positive exposure compensation, flash exposure compensation to brighten that up. Or we can go the other way and use negative exposure compensation, negative flash exposure compensation. That'll go down to that goes further than that. -4 it goes down to. So what we're doing with that is reducing the power of the flash. It could be that we've got this dark tone subject instead, and rather than when it's on 0, the flash is going to say, okay, well, this dark thing I presume is an average tone subject, and I want to put more light into it to brighten it up more. But chances are what we'd use that negative flash exposure compensation more for is for fill flash. And that is where we're just adding a little bit of light to put catch lights in eyes and lift shadows and things. So we're generally relying on the ambient light, but we're adding a little bit more light in just to brighten things up a little bit. So if I show you a couple of example pictures here. So this was shot with auto exposure, and I'm using the flash with some negative flash exposure compensation, just because I wanted to lift the shadows a little bit. It's not, it's not obviously flash lit. There's a little twinkle in the guy's eyes if you look really closely, but it's enough just to lift the shadows and put a little bit of light into it. But yeah, as I say, that was auto exposure, and that was fine. Same for this, just a bit of fill flash really. So we're outside, it's ambient light again, but again you can see just a little catch light in his eyes, and that's just where the flash is fired. But I've almost certainly got that on. It's either going to be -1.7 or -2. So it's just adding in. Well, if it's -2, it's a quarter of the amount of light that it would need to actually fully light the subject. So it's going to be as quarter as bright as that. Again, it's just normally enough to lift shadows, put a twinkle in the eye. This was on a bright, but it's got a bit of a hazy day, and most of the time with the flash here, certainly for outdoors, I was using manual exposure on the flash gun, and I was using manual exposure on the camera as well. So everything was manual on that. So I'd got the exposure right for the subjects, ambient wise, and was then just using that flash just to put an extra bit of light in, again for catch lights in eyes, lifting shadows and things like that. So a lot of the time we can quite happily use auto exposure. For general shooting, auto exposure is absolutely fine. We can take control of it. So we can either do that on the flash or on lots of cameras. Most cameras really allow you to do flash exposure compensation from the flash menu or the flash button on the camera as well. Nikon's, for instance, if you push the flash button next to where the flash pops up, and the exposure compensation button, the plus and minus button, and turn the wheel on the back, you'll be doing flash exposure compensation. On my camera, you have to press the flash button and actually set the exposure compensation in there. So you can either do it from the flash or you can do it from the camera. They're doing exactly the same thing. It doesn't really matter where you do it. So yeah, some situations I'll be using auto exposure, some I'll be using manual exposure, and it's just really finding what suits the situation that you're in. Okay. So wireless and off-camera flash, or it should be off-camera flash and wireless, I suppose. What that allows us to do is change the direction of the flash, rather than emanating from the camera and pointing straight at the subject or bouncing off the ceiling. By taking the camera off the flash, we can then change the direction of that light and hopefully make it either more interesting or more flattering for the subject, or just create something that we wouldn't be able to do with the flash on the camera. The kind of simplest way, I suppose, of using the flash off the camera would be to just literally hold it in your hand, and there's almost certainly a test button on the back of that, which means that I could flash that flash by pressing the test button. So I've certainly done that, certainly with the old flash gun that I had before, where it just always put out the full amount of light. I might be doing a picture of, say, a toadstool, and it was in some woodland. I'd have the camera on the tripod. The exposure might be 1 or 2 seconds or more than that, perhaps. And during that time, I would just press the test button and fire the flash. And it might be that I've got the flash off to one side to add a bit of light coming in, or I've got the softbox on and just want to lift some shadows somewhere or something like that. So that's the very simplest way of using the flash off the camera. Literally just as you're firing the shutter, press the test button. But you need to have slow enough shutter speed to be able to time that right. If you're trying to do that 250th of a second, you're going to struggle to press that exactly at the same You could take the flash off the camera by using a cable. So again, a very simple way of doing that would be to have a cable plugged onto the hot shoe of the camera and plugged in, and had a little hot shoe for this to attach to, and it could be one of these little stretchy cables or whatever, and move that around. But you're a bit limited as to where you might be able to position that. My camera triggers the flash by using the pop-up flash, so it will send out essentially a signal from the pop-up flash to trigger the flash gun, and it still does the TTL metering if I want it to, or it can be manual exposure. Yeah, that's what I'm using most of the time when I'm using the flash off the camera. I use pop-up flash and trigger the flash from that. So, for instance, with this shot here, these snowdrops are looking a little bit drab. It was a sunny day, but these were in the shade, and so the lighting was a bit flat and a bit drab, and I didn't really like it like that, so I thought it would look nice with a bit of sunlight on it. So I could have waited until the sun had moved round or something like that, but instead I created this with the flash instead. So the flash is off to the background, sitting on a little wall behind the flowers. The camera's pointing at the subject, obviously. The flash gun is also pointing at the subject, but from over in the background. And I'm triggering that flash gun with a pop-up flash on the camera. I'd need to put the flash gun into wireless mode for that. So the problem with this is I end up jumping backwards and forwards to show you different things. So on the flash gun, when I press the mode button here, we've got TTL at the moment, and I've got manual, and then I've got multi, which is where it could do kind of strobing. It will take a series of or flash a number of times to do kind of multiple exposure on one frame potentially. And then I've got TTL-W, which is wireless. So, and this is saying that it's a slave. So this is waiting to be told what to do. And the pop-up flash on the camera is going to tell it what to do. And I can then tell, well, when that pop-up flash fires, it triggers this to fire, and that's all good. And hopefully you end up with a decent exposure and everything with a different look. I could also, if I'd gone into that one, hang on, let's come back to that one there. Yeah, so that's saying slave there, but it could also be a master. So rather than the pop-up flash, I could have one of these mounted on the top of the camera and another one of these waiting as a slave to receive some sort of input from that flash that's on the hot shoe. The other option had there as well was manual exposure with wireless. So we're now relying, I'm setting the exposure on this using manual exposure, but it's still waiting for the signal from the camera to trigger it. And then go back to PTTL. So with that shot of the snowdrops, yeah, the flash gun in the background is set to wireless, and it's a slave, and it's waiting for that signal from the pop-up flash to fire in order to trigger the camera. Another option would be to use wireless triggers. So that would be a little wireless trigger that's sat on top of the camera in the hot shoe, and a receiver that the flash gun was mounted on. And when you take a shot, the transmitter that's on the camera sends a signal to the receiver on the flash gun, which then triggers the flash gun. And the advantage of that is that you don't need a line of sight. So that flash gun could be hidden behind, around the corner of a wall or something like that, but it would still likely to receive that radio signal and fire. Whereas if you're relying on the pop-up flash to trigger that, then you need the flash to be able to see your pop-up flash. So it needs to be kind of in line of sight. The radio option works over a much bigger range as well. So, could be up to some kind of like 300 feet or something like that. You could have your flash a long way away. You might be using a super telephoto lens and you're taking a picture of a badger that's going to be coming out and it's set. And so you've got your flash all set up and you're a long distance back and you could be using that flash to light that shot, as long as you're being respectful of the badgers. That's that, same setup, looking from behind the flash. So the flash is firing over towards the snowdrop over there, and the camera is taking the picture. I've got one of those gridded attachments on there. It's giving a very directional light, which means I'm not going to get any spill going in the front of the lens and giving me flare. That might have looked okay, but that's not necessarily what I wanted. And I've also got a coloured filter in there, coloured gel in there, which is giving us that warm tone. Looks like it's full of honey, but yeah, it's this very warm tone, and that gives us that kind of simulation of late afternoon or early evening light coming through. This shot was without flash, and the light is coming from floodlights over on the left-hand side of the picture. So out of shot over on the left-hand side is a floodlight that's or some sort of light anyway that's lighting the front end of that, and you've got the light inside the van there. It's a pizza van, but the side of the van is pretty dark. There's not an awful lot of texture on there. So I then took my camera off, flash off the camera. Well, I wasn't using the flash at all here, but I positioned my flash over out of shot on the right-hand side, so that it was then glancing across the front of the side of the van and picking out the detail on there as well. So yeah, we can take that flash off, move it around, as long as we can trigger it in some way. So pop-up flash does it for me most of the time. And I don't actually I do have a wireless trigger, but it's for my studio flashes. And I need to get another one so I can actually use it to trigger the flash gun as well at some point. But I don't tend to use it. I tend to use the pop-up flash to do that for me.
Did you set the flash off multiple times in that photo? It looks as if there are 3 of the guy and 2 of the lady.
Let's go
back to it.
No, because it was a longer exposure, so it was.
So you've got a stationary image from when the flash gun went off and she's moved.
Yeah, to be honest, whether that's actually because of the flash or whether she's just been in one position, that I can't remember what the actual ambient exposure was for that. But if it was, say, 4 seconds or something like that, I don't think it was necessarily that long. But imagine it was 4 seconds. She might have just been stood in one bit for a second and a half and then changed and stood in a different position for the rest of it. So it might be that. Or it could just be, the flash.
Because you've obviously got a substantial amount of light come in from the flash gun, because you can see the white tint over the rear wheel arch. That might be enough then to freeze her. Yeah,
potentially. I think it's hard to know where she's actually standing, how far forward she is, because you can kind of see through it. But I'm wondering if she would have been kind of shielded by the menu sign that's off to the right.
That might even be her at the back of the van as well. I see someone with a blue T-shirt and a white stripe.
Perhaps she was dancing. I don't know. I can't remember how many were in there now. Whether there were 2 or 3 people there. Go back to that previous one. Oh, there was 3 people. There we go.
Yeah, there's 3 people.
Yeah. So I suspect actually of her, I think it's the left-hand one that's just kind of the head and a bit. I think that's possibly the flash exposure on her, and the other bit is where she stood for most of the time of the exposure. Possibly, I don't know. I'm surmising there and estimating and all that kind of thing. Anyway, let's get to the end of this bit so we can have a break and stretch legs and things. This again was with a flash off camera. and it was just the bare flash gun, but with one of those coloured gels again to warm it up. Again, I was aiming for that kind of late afternoon, almost setting sun sort of light. So this is in my front garden. It was late afternoon, but the sun was setting the other side of the house. I did a video that explained how to do this. It's on YouTube. If you go to my website, you see a YouTube link near the top of the page, and this is one of, well, I think there's 3 videos that I've got on there, but one of them was how I did this one. But yeah, I tried that flash gun in different positions, and this is actually sitting on the wall at the end of the garden, pointing straight back towards the camera. Yeah, again, it's just trying to kind of replicate that natural sort of sunlight look. It's maybe not quite done it, but there you go. This was in some very damp, dull woodland where without the flash I was getting a 15-second exposure. But again, the flash is out of shot above and behind the subject, and off to the right-hand side you can see there's a bit of glow of it coming through at the top right. And it's, again, just trying to aiming to give the look of sunlight coming through the subject really. And this is using that softbox actually attachment. So the light in the background is a softbox. So the flash is below the subject, looking up into the softbox, and it's just firing through there. So it was just trying to give that absolute plain white background and almost kind of a studio kind of look to it. But yeah, so that's a softbox again off the camera. So yeah, by taking the flash off the camera, it opens up the sort of possibilities for the kind of shots that we can take. We're not just pointing the flash straight at the subject, or from the camera all the time. By moving it around, we can change the looks that we are getting. Okay, let's have a break, I reckon.
Yeah, that's far past.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, let me. Right, yes. So we got to sync speed and high speed synchronization, and what that is, and all that sort of thing. Have we lost a couple? I'll come back. Anyway,
Go to bed early.
oh yes, that's right. Yeah, no, someone did have to disappear, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
All right.
Had to go to.
The beer
Falling to tears. Well, not everyone. Anyway, right. So synchronization speed. So synchronization speed is something that you might have heard about and possibly know what it is, or possibly not. And the synchronization speed is the fastest shutter speed that the flash can fire at and still illuminate the whole of the sensor or the whole of the film at the same time. In your camera, when you're taking a photo, the vast majority of the time, you've got 2 shutters in front, or it's kind of like that. So if you imagine my face as being the sensor of the camera, when you take a picture, one shutter opens, you can see the whole of my, well, there you go, whole of my face, and then the second one comes up to finish off that exposure, and then they kind of recock, and then they kind of do this every time you take a picture, something like that. So the flash synchronization speed is the fastest shutter speed, where that first shutter has completely cleared the sensor, the flash then fires, and the second one comes up to finish off the exposure. Faster than that shutter speed, that first shutter hasn't finished going across the sensor before the second one's then starting to chase it across. And if the flash fired, then it would only expose a small proportion of my face at any one time. So I might just get my mouth exposed okay, and then the rest of me is too dark. So that's what the flash synchronization speed is. On my camera, it's 180th of a second. Lots of other cameras, it's say 200th of a second or 250th of a second. But it also depends on well, you get some lenses, some cameras can use lenses with leaf shutters, and those are ones that are almost like an aperture, but it's kind of the shutter opens up and closes back down again like that. It's built into the lens. And then you can use particularly fast shutter speeds with that, because that's always going to be kind of letting all of that light, well, not necessarily all of that light through, but it's it's exposing the whole of that thing in one go. Most of the time with the shutters, those faster shutter speeds where you're only exposing a small section at there's faster shutter speeds where you're exposing a small section at one time. We don't notice that. We don't see that that's happening. We don't notice any difference with our subject. But where potentially we do or could see it is if you've got a fast moving subject that's moving across the frame, because then if my head, this is going to be hard to do, my head was moving across it when that first shutter starts to open, my mouth is over here, and then say this one my head starts moving. So by the time my nose is exposed, it's a little bit further along. By the time my eyes are exposed, they're further along. And then it finishes off. And what my head would look like would be a kind of slanted head. There's a particular picture from years and years ago of a motor race, but it's probably about 100 years old now, something like that. It's a black and white picture, but it's got an amazing sense of speed because the car seems to be leaning forward as it's driving. The wheels are kind of oblong shaped like that. The whole car leans forward. It's almost like it's kind of rushing along, and the people in the background are leaning the other way. People stood at the roadside watching it go past are leaning back the other way, and it's because the photographers panned along as this car has gone past, but not fast enough to keep up with the car. So the car has moved one way, and the people in effect have moved another way, and this shutter's moved, and we get this weird. I should really find it for this section, I suppose. But yeah, vast majority of the time we don't see this effect in our shots, simply because those shutters are moving much faster than they would have done in those days, and we're probably not actually taking pictures that would necessarily exhibit that effect anyway. So if we were just relying on the flash synchronization speed, there would be a certain shutter speed that we wouldn't be able to use the flash beyond that shutter speed. Some cameras, or depending how your camera is set up, once you put the flash on and turn it on, you might find that the camera automatically sets that flash synchronization speed, because it's assuming that you're going to be lighting the whole of the scene with a flash. It doesn't need any ambient light, so it will pick the fastest shutter speed it can and use that. And then it's less likely to record any ambient light, and it's all going to be about the flash. Or if you're in control of the shutter speed, you would find that you get to a point where you can't choose a faster shutter speed. It might get to 200th of a second, and it won't let you pick a faster shutter speed than that. So that's this kind of flash synchronization speed, and it would depend on the flash gun that you've got, really, and the camera that you've got as well, as to whether you can use what's called high-speed synchronization. And what high-speed synchronization is using the flash gun, but at one of those faster shutter speeds, so faster than your flash synchronization speed. And how it does that is to change the way that this flash is working. Rather than doing this kind of instantaneous flash that might only last for 1,000th of a second or 5,000th of a second or something like that, depending on how much power it's needing to put out, and potentially only lighting a very small section of that sensor at any one time. What it does instead is to put out a longer continuous burst of flash, so it kind of lights and then goes back off again. I mean, it's still a very short period of time. It's going to be a shorter length of time than your flash synchronization speed is, so it's going to be maybe only 200th of a second or something like that. But it's rather than this kind of instantaneous flash, it's putting out a beam of light for just a very short period of time. And that means that as that shutter opens, and you've got part of your scene exposed, there's light bouncing back off of that subject, and as the shutter moves up across there's light falling on the sensor all of that time. So high-speed synchronization allows us to use faster shutter speeds than your flash synchronization speed. If you're taking a portrait outside, maybe it's a reasonably bright sunny day, and you've got a low aperture value, your shutter speed might want to be 1,000th of a second, for instance. And if you're using flash as a little bit of fill-in flash, you would find that without high-speed synchronization, the camera says actually the fastest shutter speed you can use is 200th of a second. You actually need 1,000th of a second to actually give you a correct exposure in that brighter light, and you'd find that that shot was going to be overexposed because you're trying to use the flash at the same time. So you'd have to set high-speed synchronization. Chances are it's going to be on the flash button on your camera. You know, there's going to be a button somewhere that allows you to control flash, or it could be potentially in the menu to set it. Chances are it's going to be called high-speed synchronization or high-speed flash or something like that. On Nikons, it's called Auto FP, and I'll keep meaning to look up. I probably have done at some point, looking to see what Auto FP actually refers to. Yeah, it doesn't say anything about high-speed synchronization, but it's Auto FP. You can go to flash synchronization speed in a Nikon camera normally, and you'd have a whole range of different shutter speeds. So you could choose from, you know, the flash synchronization speed, say 200th of a second, or 250th of a second, or something like that. Or you could say 180th of a second, or 150th of a second, or 125th, and go and say what sort of shutter speed you actually wanted to use once you're using the flash. But you'd also, chances are, certainly with the DSLR, have the option at the top of that list of 250th of a second, and then in brackets Auto FP, or 320th of a second, brackets Auto FP. And I don't know why they give you the choice, but essentially that Auto FP is the high-speed synchronization option, and it would allow your shutter speed to go faster.
Daniel, does that affect the output power of the flash? Because if you're using faster shutter speed, to get the flash to fire faster, you need to reduce the power.
It does reduce the power of the flash, but it's because it's having to put out an amount of light over a certain period of time rather than this instantaneous flash. Sorry if that's what you said, but there was a noise in the garage. I've propped the garage door open to get a bit. The radiator's on next to me. I can't turn it off, and I'm absolutely roasting here. So I thought I'd open the garage door and get a bit of colder air coming in, and then there was just a noise in there.
It's the spooks.
Spooks in there, yeah. Something like that, or a massive spider that's just knocked some envelopes off. Or
Is FP flash power in that case?
Auto FP, or could be. Knowing Nikon, it'll be something completely different. Probably something about philosophy, but flash philosophy. Probably
Philo pastry.
Yeah. Auto philo pastry gives you a lovely result. No, it could be, I don't know. Yeah, so because if you're on full power with this, for instance, and it was doing that light in a very short period of time, 2,000th of a second, something like that, it's kind of putting all that light out in that very short period of time, and it can send it over a particularly large distance. So it's more powerful like that. If it's having to put that amount of light out over a period of time that's, say, 200th of a second, then it's got to reduce the overall power during that time to be able to stretch it out over that longer time. So you'd find that you wouldn't be able to project it as far as you could do otherwise. But chances are, if you're using that high-speed synchronization, it's because you're shooting a portrait or potentially a group of people in reasonably light conditions, and all you need really is fill flash, and it's almost certainly going to be fine for that, and whatever the lighting's like, really. So as long as the people, as long as you're not trying to light everyone in the, well, not there's be that many people in the stand of a football stadium now, but unless you're not trying to light a whole mass of people and they're 60 feet away, then you're unlikely really to run into any problems with that lower output that it can give you. But yeah, so flash synchronization speed is the fastest shutter speed you can set when using the flash normally, but high speed synchronization allows you to set a faster shutter speed than that. What we can then find is that this shot here, for instance, was, it was an overcast day, so the light level was fairly low. So to start with, I didn't need to be using high-speed synchronization, but then it got a little bit brighter, or significantly brighter. It wasn't, it wasn't glorious sunshine or anything like that, but it was significantly brighter. And with the flash limited to the flash synchronization speed, or the shutter speed limited to the flash synchronization speed, it meant that I was then overexposing areas in this shot. We've got burnt out areas of sky. So David's hair's gone pure white, and yeah, that wasn't ideal. So I then switched to high-speed synchronization, and it allowed me to choose a faster shutter speed, which can retain the detail in the sky and get the full range of tones that I should have done. And I was just using that flash as fill flash. It wasn't trying to light the bridge in the background or anything like that. Again, it's just putting twinkles in eyes and things like that. Certainly when you've got a situation where you might have that relatively bright sky, but you're looking to light foreground, then the high-speed synchronization is really useful. It's either that, or you end up using low ISOs, which isn't necessarily a problem, but also higher aperture values that you might actually want to be using. So here I was trying to keep the aperture value down lower to blur the background a little bit. It's not particularly blurred by any means, but it's ever so slightly blurred. But that would mean that my shutter speed would end up going beyond the flash synchronization speed. So high-speed synchronization could give me that. Here we've got the sun kind of quite low in the sky over to the background. The sky is still largely overexposed here, but we've got sunlight on areas here. So again, a faster shutter speed was needed. And again, just using the fill flash with the high-speed synchronization, we'll get that exposed okay. And again, here we've got that bright sky in the background. We're using the fill flash there, which has lit the guy in the foreground lighter. He's brighter than the bride and her friends, but yeah, again, I'd have needed a faster shutter speed than I could have set otherwise. So high-speed synchronization can be really useful. Shooting right into the sun. I think the shutter speed was something like 2,000th of a second for this one, but the flash was then used to light these two in the foreground. Matt Oliver, one of the gardeners from over the RHS garden at Hyde Hall in Essex, had just won the pumpkin race, where he and 3 other people had rode giant pumpkins across the lake. And yeah, anyway, you do see some interesting subjects every now.
There's not more you can say to that, is there?
No. It was the largest outdoor grown UK pumpkin at the time. And I can't remember how heavy that one was. And then the following year he grew one which was even bigger, and it was something like about 6 ounces short of 1,500 pounds. Massive, great thing. And yeah, and it was kind of, when he said it was 6 ounces short, I was like, oh, if you cut it kind of the following day or something, it would have probably put those 6 ounces on, and he would have had 1,500 pounds. But there you go, it's one of those things. So he's a record holder. Okay. So second or trailing curtain synchronization is another thing that we can use with flashes. So when we think again about those shutters, one opens, another one closes that exposure off, that kind of thing. We have a first curtain or a first curtain and a second curtain or a trailing curtain to that shutter. And most of the time when we're using the flash normally the flash will fire when that first curtain is open or that first shutter is opened. The flash fires because chances are this one's coming up straight behind it or very, very shortly after it. And it's not going to make a blind bit of difference when that flash actually fires. So as a standard thing, the flash is firing at the start of the exposure when that first curtain opens. If the flash is the sole light source, or if your shutter speed is just fast enough that the ambient light is, or the movement is being frozen anyway, then it's not going to make any difference when that flash fires. And say the start of the exposure is just as good as any time. But if we've got movement in a scene, and we've got some ambient light that's recording that movement as well. So let's say we've got someone riding past on a bike. I should have a little bike toy, really. Have I got anything that could double up as a bike? Not really. No, you can't even see it. It's black. Right. Let's say we've got this little rabbit running past. And as it runs past, and we're glad that amuses you, we've got this little rabbit running past.
I thought you might bring up a pumpkin or something.
Well, if I had one big enough, I'll tell you what, look, there's one. This could almost, oh no, I've got something attached now. I'll go back to the rabbit. Anyway, so we've got this thing that goes along this shot here. And let's say there's some ambient light. So, and the shutter speed is going to be 1 second. To record the ambient light. We've got the sheep and the fields and things in the background, and this rabbit's running past. But it's reasonably dark, and we need a 1 second exposure to record that background. The sheep's going to stand nice and still for us, but this rabbit's moving along. Without flash, we just get this green blur going along the bottom of this shot. Wouldn't have any definition there. So what we could use is a flash that fires at some point during this exposure and freezes the movement of this rabbit, and then we get a blur as well from where it's moved. But if that flash is firing at the start of the exposure, we'll get that defined rabbit here on this on the left-hand side for you, left-hand side of the shot, and then a blur that comes out in front of it. And the kind of natural way we think of blurring from movement is for that trail to come out behind the subject, or for that subject to leave it in the direction that it's travelled from. So if we had a nice sharp rabbit here and a blur that came out in front of it, it would kind of make us think that rabbit was going backwards, and it travelled across here, and that's where it was, and it left this trail out from behind it. So that's where we can use the trailing or second curtain synchronization. So rather than that flash firing at the start of the exposure, when that when the shutter first opens, we make it wait until just before that second one comes up to close the exposure off. So the shutter opens, we do the ambient exposure, flash fires, and the second shutter comes up and closes off that exposure. So now we'd get the shutter opens, the rabbit runs along here, we get a trail coming along here, and then right at the end of the exposure, the flash fires, and we get that nice defined rabbit there with a trail that comes out from behind it. So it's a more kind of natural way of leaving a trail behind you. You don't generally leave a trail in front of you. So if it was, say, a bike riding past, it would have that same sort of thing again. Put the rabbit back down there. I don't think we need the rabbit anymore. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. So again, that's likely to be a setting on the camera rather than the flash gun. You might well be able to set it on the flash gun. I always do it on the, yeah. So I, actually look, I can put this up on here. Let's see if we can get it focus. Are you going to focus on it? Right. I've got this button that says sync on here. So if I press that, I've got to try and remember what they actually come up with. Let's go back to that one. So that says HS with a flash, so that's high speed synchronization. We've got that one, which I'm going to have a quick look at. So that's going to flash at the start of the exposure, and then there's another little arrow sort of after it. And then if I press that one, hopefully, that's now got kind of a little arrow and then a solid arrow, so that's firing at the end of the exposure. So that would be a trailing or second curtain synchronization. But I just find it a lot easier to do that on the camera rather than fiddling around with those different buttons on the back of the flash, but it's entirely up to you how you want to be controlling that. If your camera doesn't support or give you the option of trailing curtain synchronization. Would it do it if you set it on the flash? Probably not, but it'd be worth a try. Yeah, generally it would be, you know, sort of a setting on the camera where you could, you know, sort of actually tell the flash to do the trailing curtain synchronization if you wanted it to. So by using this sort of thing, you know, we can start, you know, if you've got movement in a scene and you've got a longer exposure, we can start deciding how that movement actually looks. So if we come on to that slideshow and look on there. So here, for instance, this was a 1 second exposure. This is this little festival that we normally go to. And this is a big top. They've got, well, this lady at the front's got a hula hoop with LEDs built into it. So it's doing different colours and different patterns as the hoop's going. By using a 1 second exposure, it allows that movement to record. And then the flash is firing at the end of the exposure and freezing her, although that movement isn't really kind of directional. In fact, the first few that I show you aren't really directional, so it could be at the end of the exposure, but anyway, or at the beginning. But yeah, we've got definition on the subject because the flash is fired, but we've also got that longer exposure which shows the movement of the hoops. This one's the same. Again, she's kind of pretty stationary, but she's got a hula hoop again where the LED's in. It does make me laugh, her expression on this one. And this again. So, you know, we're using these longer exposures and firing the flash at some point during that exposure. As I say, for these ones, to be honest, it wouldn't really matter whether that flash was at the beginning or the end of the exposure, because we don't know which way that hula hoop is spinning, and it doesn't really matter which way that hula hoop is spinning. Same to a certain extent with this, but when we look at the arm here, we've got that movement coming out behind. Well, it certainly, yeah, it certainly looks as though the arm is moving downwards. Because we've got the trail coming out above. Now, it could actually be that that flash is... generally, I have my flash set on the trailing curtain synchronization anyway, because if your shutter speed is short enough that it's not going to make any difference, then it doesn't make any difference. And if your shutter speed is long enough for it to make a difference, then I'd normally want to have it on that trailing synchronization anyway. So I'm certain that this is on the trailing shutter synchronization. So yeah, hands moving down, other hand is also moving down by a little bit, and we've got that trail moving out from behind it. But again, that longer exposure allows the these were poi, so poi that are on fire, she's spinning those around, and yeah, allows that to record as well. Here, this woman's walking past carrying a turkey in a box or something to do with turkeys in the box. And as I've panned across, we've got some movement there as well. And then, you know, the flash has fired too. So again, we've got some movement there. And, you know, rather than, you know, flash firing and freezing everything, by using that slightly longer exposure, as she's gone past, we've got blurring of the boxes going as well. And if we end up with really long shutter speeds, this was at that wedding in the evening, and I did this on aperture priority, and I can't remember what shot I'd taken prior to this, but this the camera chose a shutter speed of something like 5 seconds or something like that, and I wasn't expecting it to. And I took this picture. The flash has frozen this guy nicely. He looks a little bit merry, and yeah, it just kind of. Well, I took this picture and then just moved the camera about because I wasn't expecting it to be taking this very long exposure, and we get all that kind of, you know, the light trails and everything from that. Quite, yeah, totally unintentional, but I liked the effect that I got because of it. But yeah, where we have these longer exposures and choosing when the flash is firing can certainly alter the way that movement looks within that. Yeah, if there is movement, using that second curtain or the trailing curtain or trailing shutter or second shutter or however it's called on your camera allows us to fire the flash at the end of the exposure. And if there is movement that you want a trail behind your subject or from where it has been, then you'd set that trailing curtain synchronization. And that is your lot as far as slideshow is concerned, and things that I can think of. So if you could pick up a leaflet before you go, that would be quite miraculous. So don't do that. But I'll wave a leaflet at you. There we go. Here's a leaflet. You can pretend to pick that up. But yes, if you want to see the sort of things I do, just go on my website. It's danielbridge.co.uk. Hopefully, Chris might let you know what that was.
I've already shared it a couple of times. I'll do it again.
Fantastic. No, that's fine. If you sent it a couple of times, that's more than enough. Don't want to make people sick of me.
Anything to fill the
It's
newsletter up.
in our newsletter as well.
Yeah.
Sorry?
It's gone in our newsletter as well.
Excellent. Fantastic. I send out a newsletter.
Is there a copy of your leaflet on the website?
Well, no, but it's all that information and more is on my website. So it's got kind of some quotes from happy customers, and a kind of a rundown of that is a little bit see-through, isn't it?
Very good.
Interactive leaflet here. So a little rundown of what different workshops I do. So you'll find that on there, and a little bit there about a sheep in a field. There we go. About the private tuition and stuff. So it's just contact details, but it's all on my website. So there's no real advantage in having a leaflet, and I'm not getting any more printed for a little while. So if anyone's got any questions, then yes.
Right, a couple of years ago, I bought a Yongnuo flash gun for my Canon outfit.
Yeah.
And then promptly got rid of all my Canon stuff and bought an Olympus.
Yeah.
Can I use the same flash gun? Is there any reason why I shouldn't? Am I likely to blow something up?
Almost certainly you wouldn't blow anything up. If it's a Canon if it's a Canon dedicated flash gun in the first place, then Canon are very delicate and a bit kind of weedy. So flash guns have to be a bit gentle on them. So there is a voltage that passes, called a trigger voltage, that passes across the contacts on a flash gun when it fires. Canon cameras can't take anything more than 10 volts. So anything that's dedicated to a Canon camera, that voltage has to be less than 10 volts. So I don't know of any other cameras that are that kind of feeble, that they can't.
Feeble.
And,
Delicate.
Nikons, as far as I know, are about 60 volts. Pentax, 600 volts, hard as nails. Which was really lucky, because that first flash gun that I got actually produced a voltage that was around about 200 volts. So if I'd used it on pretty much any other camera, I'd have blown the flash circuit. So chances are it'd be absolutely fine. I'm not going to say, it'd be absolutely definitely be fine. But I'd be very surprised if it did any damage at all. Try it on someone else's Olympus first.
There is a manual or TTL.
But it would just be manual exposure, yeah. So that would be the limitation. You'd have to use it on manual exposure, because the camera isn't going to communicate. Every manufacturer has their own little variety of what these pins are shaped like, and what pattern it is and what they do. So yes, you could use it on manual exposure, almost certainly, and I would be very, very surprised if it caused any damage at all, but I can't guarantee it. The thing to do really probably would be to email Yongnuo and ask them, say, is there any reason why I can't put this on there? And I'm sure they'd say it'd be fine, but you'd have to use manual exposure.
You could use off-camera trigger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, you could use a radio triggers. So you'd have a trigger on the camera, trigger on the flash gun.
Well, I've got
You'd still have to use it on manual exposure.
I've got the Yungo wireless trigger for a Canon, and
Okay.
it works on the Olympus as well.
Right. So
Picking up the fire button on it.
okay.
Oh,
The flash units aren't specific to Canon or Nikon, I know that.
Sorry, Chris.
The Yungin flash units, you just change a setting on the back. You can change them to any manufacturer.
It depends which one you've got.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
hang on, I'll have a look.
could be sometime.
Oh,
And go away.
while she's looking, can I ask a question?
Of course
please?
you can, yeah.
And this is about Canon.
Right.
You've covered the trigger lens and the manual and the multi modes.
Yeah.
On my Canon, it's got an X-A and an XM. Do you know what they are?
No. So the A would almost certainly be auto exposure, the M would be manual exposure. So I'm sort of wondering whether that is for using it as a. Is there a specific slave setting on there as well, or is that?
No.
No, so it might well be that is for, if you're using it as a slave, so it's an external flash gun rather than mounted on the, and whether it's auto exposure or manual exposure. I would take a stab at that.
Okay.
Google would be your.
That's a Google job then.
Yeah, Google.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. Those of you who know what you're looking at,
Sorry, that's 565, isn't it? It's not 56S.
565EX.
Okay.
Take it
Yeah,
out.
so it's a poor choice of font, I think, that one, isn't it?
It's only been out of the box once.
Oh.
Oh, sure.
Hang on, let's
What's on the hot shoe? Tony, let's have a look at the hot shoe header.
Oh, excuse me.
that is it's going to be specifically for Canon one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm.
So actually, was there a pin in the middle of that?
Yes,
Or-
there was. Yeah.
there is?
Yeah,
Okay. Because mine.
there's 4 and then a 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
That one's quite far forward, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
So the centre pin is the fire pin.
yeah. And that's the Gubbins's is
Oh yeah.
which
That's the gubbins. Yeah. So yeah. So you've got all the
Yeah.
all the different things that we've spoken about tonight
Yeah.
on there. But yeah, I very much suspect you're going to be using that purely on manual exposure. But it'd be a bounce and swivel. And I think you've just found the bits that you pull out of the
yeah,
at the top of that.
allegedly.
You'd have to pull the wide angle diffuser out. Comes out
Yeah,
with a
so-
wide angle diffuser.
There should be a bit. You better get your finger in some or a fingernail in there somewhere. And you find that you pull that wide angle bit out as well as the.
Got it.
We done it. There we go.
Yeah, so it's got a flappy doodle.
Yeah, flappy doodle. Yeah.
Yeah,
Let me
and
make a note of that for future talks.
yeah.
Got to get your terminology right.
Actually, I think Heather, that's a Flappy Doodle Mark II you've got on that.
Is it? Right.
Definitely.
So if I'll shove it on me, I'll stick it on the old 5, Mark 5, because if I blow that up, I can drop it down the stairs and claim on insurance.
So what's your main camera now then?
EM1 Mark 2.
Okay.
Olympus.
Lovely. Yeah. Yeah, try. I mean, yeah, they both communicate the same way. Yeah, I could look at the hot shoe on my Lumix, but it's you'd end up looking in your lap if I was to take that off and have a look at that. So I won't do that. I can't see above it, but
Right, so you're actually using a camera as your webcam.
Yes. Sorry, you missed that bit. You were out feeding the fox.
I'm always one of the late
Yeah.
arrivals.
I've got a Lumix G9, so I've started using that as a webcam for these sort of things. I'm just not. If it's just something a little bit, less exciting, then I'll just use a bog standard webcam. But it seems to work all right.
It was
Tell you
the
what, Andrew, that was the tea break question.
oh right.
Yeah.
I recognised that he wasn't using a standard webcam because he was able to focus quite quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I've been noticing.
Tell you what, I have
Well,
found
few
on that.
webcams can actually focus. I mean, mine's fixed focus.
Yeah, well, mine's autofocus, but Daniel was focusing in and out as he was putting things towards the screen, and very smartly and smoothly as well.
I do have to lean over the top of the monitor and press and touch the screen on the camera
to force it to
actually
focus.
It's on continuous focusing, and I was hoping it was going to kind of refocus, but
He likes
it
the
doesn't
back.
seem to want to.
Yeah, put it on continuous focus.
I've got it on continuous focus, but it doesn't
Oh,
seem
bugger.
any difference to how it actually works as a webcam. Anyway, sorry, is it Heather?
I was going to say, tell you what is interesting is it's got the second one along there, the second curtain sync as a separate button.
Okay, yeah.
You just hit that and it does it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just as good as the manufacturer's flashes.
That's almost an exact copy of the Canon one.
Yeah.
At half the price.
Yes.
Yeah.
The same numbering scheme.
Yeah.
It's essentially the same flash. They just took one apart and went, let's rebuild this, and using their own bits.
Now they probably make
Possibly
them for Canon and then just yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Auto philo pastry,
Yeah.
focal plane.
Focal plane. Yes, that's right. Yes, I do remember reading that before.
That's
Focal
right.
plane doesn't really make any sense. Auto focal plane. What was that?
Yeah. Philo pastry is better.
Other than it's a focal plane shutter rather than a leaf shutter, but Speedo pastry much nicer. So auto philo pastry, and I've forgotten what you said that little bit was called now.
Flabbery doobry or something like that. Flabby doodle.
Flappy
Flappy
Doodle.
Doodle, that was
Oh,
it.
the Dubry what?
Flappy Doodle Mark II, yes.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks very much for tonight.
That's all right.
It's been really, really enjoyable. You covered a lot about flashes. If nothing else, you reminded me that I've actually got a ring flash in the cupboard. I'm going to have a play with it now. So that was a bit of a shock. And I certainly think we're going to see some people trying and playing with flash to just try stuff, especially when especially we're all locked down now, so you've got time to get your flash units out and
Are we going to have a little competition again?
We're still on our textures one till the end of the month, so we can probably bang out a flash one for November if you like.
Good idea.
That's a good idea. Why not? This is how we do the
People who
program.
haven't got flash guns have gone, oh.
This is how we make people like me who forget everything unless we actually try putting it in practice. As we have a little competition to force us to use some of the things we've learned.
Yeah.
That's good. So, I mean, the textures one, the lighting is important in the textures one. So you could still use your flash gun off the camera, for instance, glancing across a surface, something that shows you some texture.
Yeah. We may come and ask you if you would judge it for us.
I've done judging at 3 clubs. The first time I did judging was up at Great Notley Camera Club, and they were doing a macro. I've done a macro talk to them, and I might have even been the follow. I don't think it followed on from that, but as they knew I was kind of into macro, they said, "Oh, do you want to come along and just an internal club competition? Do you want to judge our macro competition?" So I said, "Yeah, that's fine. You know, I've never done judging before, but I'll do my best." You know. So they said, "Right, what we do? Yeah, this is in a hall," and they said, "We'll show you each one. You see it for a second. We'll just whiz through it, and then you can talk about each one." So right, fine. And I said, "And what are the marks out? The marks out of 10. You can give half points, but we'll round them up." So fine, okay. So we go through all these sort of things, whiz through these pictures, and never being a member of a camera club, and never judging a camera club competition before. What I didn't realise, I should have asked them, "What's the lowest mark you normally get?" I thought there were some there that were, yeah, they'd at least made the effort to put a picture in, but it wasn't an awful lot of effort, I don't think. So I think the lowest one that I gave was something like 3.5.
Oops.
I gave someone a 5, and they were going, "Oh, Kaz has never had a 5 before," and no one got a 10. You see, I didn't realise that. You know, you should be fairly liberal with 10s. Throw them out here, there, and everywhere. But it was the one that won. It was one of these kind of droplet shots where you get kind of a little crown coming up. Yeah. Black background, but in the top left were a couple of little highlights, not really bright highlights, but there was obviously something there that caught the light of the flash. And I was thinking, well, it's such a, I mean, it was a nice shot, but it's such a controlled situation. You really shouldn't end up with these highlights there. They should have controlled that. So I'm not going to give them a 10. I'll give them a 9.5 because there's still room for improvement. So no one got a 10, and the lowest mark was a 3.5. So yeah. So
I bet they didn't ask you back, did they?
No, they didn't ask me. We did go to the pub afterwards, and I just said, "Well, it's an internal competition. Just kind of shift them all up a bit. The ones that got kind of 3s and 4s could be 7s, and the ones that got 5, 6s could be 8s, and anything, and just shift it all up like that. It doesn't make any odds to me. I don't mind." But
what have you got in mind, out of interest there, Paul? Have you a full session judging, or just a 10-minute pop in and have a little resume with us kind of thing?
Well, I was just thinking of having a look at them all and giving us a first, second, and third, and if some are highly commended.
That sounds like it's a full club meeting.
No. I think you just send them over to them.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking would be a better bet. It's just 10 or 15-minute roundabout break time.
Yeah, it sounds as though Daniel's quite a harsh judge, so we don't really want to be running for 2.
I've already decided not to put mine in. I don't want a 2.
No, quite.
No, well, you just tell me what the lowest mark and I'll.
If it's first, second, and third, there won't be marks. It's just first, second, and third.
Highly commended and all that sort of thing.
2's fine. 1 point for entering and 1 for getting your name on it.
Right.
Bonus point for using Flash.
Well, exactly.
Right, fun though this is, I've got to go and walk the dog in a second. So,
So if we flashing in forest, Chris.
Yeah. So thanks very much, Daniel. It's been great. Everybody's really seems to have enjoyed themselves, and I'm sure we've all learned something. So can we all just say thank you to Daniel in the usual H2 way?
Yeah, well done. It's good.